A senior official says the government will continue to increase housing supply. In Europe, a widening dragnet for terror suspects. And millions attend the Pope's final Mass on his current visit to the Philippines.
Good evening. Yesterday, Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying said the government will soon put an end to the housing shortage in the SAR. Today, Secretary for Transport and Housing Anthony Cheung said he still sees an imbalance between supply and demand, and he was not specific about when supply would meet demand. Liz Yoon reports.
Speaking to TVB News today, Secretary for Transport and Housing Anthony Cheung suggested that the chief executive was trying to draw people's attention to external factors which cause housing demand to fluctuate.
With the possible changes in the global economic environment, for example, the level of interest rates, whether some economies will tone down their quantity easing measures, these all will affect the overall demand pattern. I think the chief executive is right to point out that in the future, of course, how long that will take is a matter of discussion, but in the future, the gap will be narrowing.
Calling it a proposal that kills two birds with one stone, Cheung supports the Green Farm home ownership pilot scheme proposed in the latest policy address.
Green farmers, mainly public rental housing tenants, will be able to buy newly constructed public rental blocks at a discount price, which will be lower than HOS units. Now that would give the tenants more incentive, financial incentive, to move out. So it will be a kind of scheme which could be beneficial both to the sitting tenants and people who are waiting for public rental housing.
Some criticized that the government weighs too heavily on the welfare of public rental housing tenants. Cheung refuted those claims, saying that the pilot scheme does not lead to losses for other individuals. He added that the government will pay close attention to the details of the plan to ensure fairness for all. There are also suggestions that the government should explore other ways to allocate home ownership scheme units. But Cheung thinks sticking to balloting is a better option.
Now, if we are to move from balloting to, say, a point system, then how do you design such a point system? How many points to be assigned to age, to different marital background, family background, your existing living conditions? All this will be very controversial, and in fact, will make the system even more complicated.
Regarding the heated debate on a plan to redevelop Tai Hang Sai Estate, Cheung said its owner, the Hong Kong Settlers Housing Corporation, will not surrender the site to the government. He reassured that the company will work on rehousing the existing tenants as part of the redevelopment scheme. But lawmaker Ronnie Tong thinks this may not be the best option in terms of public interest, as the site's land lease terms impose certain restrictions on redevelopment.
The most you can build is around 10 stories. And nowadays, I think most public housing would go as high up as 20, 30, even 40 stories. So I would imagine that as currently stands, the current development is certainly not justified to be continued in this way.
Liz Yun, TVB News.
Basic Law Committee member Albert Chan says he is not optimistic that the political reform proposal to be put forward by the government will gain enough support from lawmakers for passage. He also criticized the pan-democratic camp for opposing any proposal based on the reform framework set by the National People's Congress Standing Committee. Owen Fung reports.
Earlier, Basic Law Committee member Albert Chen proposed a none-of-the-above option to be included in the ballot paper during the 2017 chief executive election. This would allow voters to veto undesirable candidates. While the government said it's open-minded about the idea, Chen believes it's still not acceptable to the pan-democrats.
I'm not optimistic about this political reform package being passed in LegCo because of the opposition of the pan-democrats.
And should the current proposal be voted down in the Legislative Council, Chen says it's unlikely that universal suffrage will be implemented in the SAR before 2022. Chen also criticized the Pan-Democrats' pledge to veto the reform proposal as being detrimental to public interests. He believes some cooperation with the central government is the best way forward.
So people of Hong Kong need to understand what is in their best interest and use the power of public opinion and use the power of the vote, including the vote in 2016, to express their views. Whether there will be universal suffrage will depend on how they vote in the next election.
Democratic Party Chairwoman Emily Lau hit back at Chen's criticisms.
We represent quite a sizable portion of Hong Kong. Most Hong Kong people understand the need to work with the central government. But what they would like is for the Hong Kong government to have the courage and determination to go to Beijing to reflect their wishes and concern.
Lau added that those from the pro-establishment camp should reflect Hong Kong people's demand for democracy to the central government. Owen Fung, TVB News.
Greek police have made several arrests in connection with a terror plot in Belgium. The sweep comes amid a widening dragnet across Europe following the Paris attacks and ongoing protests over sensitive political cartoons in France. James Aiken reports.
4 people have been taken into custody in Greece for questioning over a foiled plot to attack Belgian police. Investigators are trying to determine if one of the suspects is the ringleader of a Belgian jihadi cell that was dismantled on Thursday. For the first time in 30 years, Belgian army troops are being mobilized to reinforce police. About 300 troops are now guarding sites that could be terrorist targets.
Today we are deployed in Antwerp and Brussels. We are looking into other sites in Belgium. The crisis center is assessing them to look if further deployment is necessary.
The deployment is part of a broad package of government anti-terrorism measures approved on Friday and comes a day after 2 suspects were killed and dozens of others were taken into custody in raids across Western Europe. Belgium's threat level has been raised to 3, the second highest level. In a second day of protests in the former French colony of Niger in West Africa, demonstrators continue to retaliate for satirical cartoons in the Charlie Hebdo newspaper. Several people are dead after mobs attacked churches, Christian homes, and police stations in the predominantly Muslim country. Sales of the paper have been banned.
Une France sans distinction de religion.
France's president, meanwhile, is promising that France will oppose anyone who wants to impose a religious war on its soil. François Hollande also said that protesters in other countries do not understand France's attachment to freedom of speech. Meanwhile, Japan is stepping up aid to the Middle East. As part of a regional tour, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe announced more than $200 million in non-military assistance for countries battling Islamic State. During a stop in Cairo, Abe warned that the world will suffer an immeasurable loss if terrorism spreads in the Middle East. James Aiken, TVB News.
Millions of people crammed into Manila today to bear witness to Pope Francis' final Mass at Rizal Park. Here's sights and sounds of the Pope as he wraps up his 3-day trip to Asia's largest Catholic country. Pope Francis made his way through the streets of Manila in a new Pope-mobile converted from the Philippine jeepney. He arrived at Rizal Park amid a rain-drenched day to celebrate one of the largest outdoor masses in Philippine history. Elated crowds greeted him as he quickly circulated through the throngs. Organizers say as many as 6 million people attended today. It would be a record compared with the 5 million here 20 years ago to witness a Mass by Pope John Paul II. Many clutch images of the infant Jesus as today's Mass coincides with a local Catholic feast day, the Santo Niño. Many faithful traveled afar and didn't let the rain dampen their spirits to hear the pontiff's message of hope for the downtrodden and destitute.
I feel very excited. This is very beautiful and it's meaningful for me.
So prepare ourselves to celebrate the sacred mystery.
Francis also drew a huge crowd earlier today when he addressed those at a Catholic university in Manila. He nearly broke down in tears when hearing the stories of children who grew up poor on the streets. The saddest account came from 12-year-old Giselle Palomar. She spoke of children abandoned by their parents and end up in prostitution. Pope Francis admitted he had no answer, but urged them to show true compassion for others. He also visited the Vatican Embassy in Manila. That's where he offered his personal condolences to the father of a young girl who was killed while organizing the Pope's Mass in typhoon-hit Tacloban. Today's Mass concluded the Pope's 6-day tour of Asia. Bearing witness to the pontiff was so meaningful, a national holiday was declared in the Philippines for the duration of his 3-day visit.
Indonesia has executed 6 prisoners, including 5 foreigners, for drug offenses, despite international pleas for clemency. The prisoners were killed by firing squad shortly after midnight. The foreigners were from Nigeria, Malawi, Vietnam, the Netherlands, and Brazil. Brazil and the Netherlands have condemned the executions, saying they would affect bilateral relations. They've also recalled their ambassadors in Indonesia. President Joko Widodo in December rejected clemency requests for all 6 convicts. He has taken a tough stance on the rule of law and pledged no clemency for drug offenders. Indonesia resumed executions in 2013 after a 5-year gap.
And still ahead in our newscast, a look at a metabolic disorder screening plan for newborn babies. A warning about health risks posed by shisha smoking. And a solo climb up to the top of North America's tallest peak.
The Oscars on Pearl. 咪俾睇唔見嘅甲醛破壞你嘅家庭幸福。立邦金裝抗甲醛正味全效，分解有害甲醛，轉化成水分子，仲超級抗菌。金主，捍衛家人健康，我的靈感，我的立邦。
聽講呢間私家醫院嘅服務幾好㗎？
有幾好咧？以你嘅情況，個手術喺我呢間診所做就得㗎啦。
真係得。先生，呢份係你嘅手術費報價單。
收費清楚就放心啦。
To enhance the quality, safety, and price transparency of private healthcare services in order to protect consumer rights, the government is seeking your views on the recommendations in a public consultation.
Michelin star-winning French-Japanese cuisine, luscious Asian and European-inspired pastries, health treatments and accessories for men, plus functional bathroom designs. Thursday night, Dolce Vita at 10 on Pearl. The time now is 7:44. The time check was brought to you by Seiko.
Welcome back. Last week's policy address announced plans to study the